Welcome to Past and Presents. This is our last episode of the season, so to speak, and as you can kind of tell from my surroundings, this is our special episode. This is our road trip episode. Ever since we came up with the idea of kind of fusing past and presents and making location a really important part of the webisode series, we thought that we should have something that kind of symbolized the notion of history as a journey. We talked about the past as a foreign country, which implies travel and movement. Well, what better way to underscore that before we go for the semester than to actually go to a place and maybe to shoot a few clips along the way. So we're on our way on I-35 North, headed to the city of Duluth on the shores of Lake Superior. We'll stop a couple of places along the way and then show you a couple of sites in Duluth once we get there before we wrap up the semester in this first season of Past and Presents. Made our first stop on our road trip episode of Past and Presents. We're just outside Pine City, Minnesota. This is a little over an hour north of the Twin Cities off the interstate, and we're into the woods here off the Snake River at the Northwest Company Fur Trade Post. This is one of 26 sites around the state administered by the Minnesota Historical Society, so it's not just the History Center in Fort Snelling, it's sites around the state. And so this is a post that's a kind of living history site set in the year 1804. So over 50 years before Minnesota became a state, when this is still a territory, this is still the frontier. This is a site where European traders, British and French, and Native Americans, the Ojibwe in particular, met to exchange goods, to exchange furs. And so we're standing here overlooking the post itself, a kind of wooden fort structure they've reconstructed. And then there's also an Ojibwe encampment just a little way down the trail. Just wanted to show you this, partly to give you a sense of how the classroom can expand beyond Bethel, beyond the Twin Cities, into the state of Minnesota. We've had students do papers, for example, from Fort Ripley, have gone up and done military history. So as you continue to think about internships or research opportunities, do cast your gaze a little bit beyond the Twin Cities itself. Okay, we'll keep going on our road trip. We'll stop in Hinckley next, but first, when we pick up our faculty conversation for this week. We're about halfway on our road trip to Duluth. We've stopped in Hinckley, Minnesota, home of world-famous Toby's Restaurant. We'll be getting some gas and a caramel roll later. This is also the home of the Great Fire of 1894, however. Hinckley, in the late 19th century, was the center of pine tree logging, and there had been a drought all summer. And on September 1st, it exploded into a massive conflagration. Temperatures got up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Several hundred people died. There's a museum here if you're interested in the Great Hinckley Fire. Probably its most famous victim, we think, was a guy named Boston Corbett, better known as the Union soldier who shot John Wilkes Booth during the manhunt following Lincoln's assassination. We're going to come back to our road trip, but why don't we throw it back to our alumni interview for this week. We've arrived in Duluth, Minnesota, and we're in what's called the Civic Center District in downtown Duluth. I'm standing in front of the Soldier and Sailors Monument. This dates to 1921, so kind of in the wake of World War I, but actually for the 60th anniversary of the American Civil War. So if you look at the names inscribed on the monument, these were surviving veterans in 1921 from Duluth and greater St. Louis County. It's a really interesting memorial. It's a lot more nakedly patriotic than a lot of memorials from the 1920s. In fact, the statue that I'm standing in front of is called Patriotism Guards the Flag. It was designed by Paul Wayland Campbell, who's an architect who also worked on the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. The rest of the memorial is by Cass Gilbert, who did Minnesota State Capitol, which many of you have seen before. We mention this partly because it's in the middle of this kind of neoclassical district. The U.S. Courthouse is over there, the St. Louis County Courthouse, so it's kind of the center of politics and law in Duluth. At a time in the 1920s when Duluth was really positioning itself to be a kind of international city, this port city connected to Canada with Lake Superior, but really something bigger than St. Paul and Minneapolis, actually. So it's part of the City Beautiful movement. And they chose neoclassical architecture to emphasize the power and the stature and the permanence of Duluth. The population of St. Louis County has actually diminished since 1920, and Duluth never did really achieve that status, although it's certainly still a very interesting city on lots of counts. So we'll look at one more site in Duluth before we say goodbye for this episode and for this semester. But let's pick up our last faculty conversation. We've come to the end of our journey today on a road trip in Duluth. We're at the tip of Canal Park on Lake Superior. You see Duluth's very famous aerial bridge behind us. Originally, the first bridge was from 1905. The one you see now is from the first year of the Great Depression, actually. See a lighthouse. You see I talk about a lot of the features of life here in the harbor in Duluth, what made it such an important economic center, and still is in many ways. This is also the end of our journey for the semester. We do have one more class left for students on Monday night, but this is our last webisode of Past and Presents for this series. Thank you so much for watching, whether you're an alum or someone else checking us out on YouTube or one of the students in Intro to History. It's been fun to take you to different sites around the Twin Cities and the state of Minnesota to remind us of the way the past and present collide in lots of different places, not just in the classroom. So students, enjoy the rest of your studies. Alumni, I hope to see you at lots of different events, and thanks for watching.